In today's episode, you'll meet Jogen Salzberg, a Dharma teacher in the Zen tradition who recently left his identity as a Soto Zen monk to start a new chapter in his life as a lay teacher. We'll talk about the joys and challenges of monastic life, why he left, and what it's like to explore a new identity after being defined by one role for years. Adam Jogen Salzberg Sensei is an ordained Zen Buddhist teacher with Dharma Transmission in the Soto Zen lineage. He has practiced meditation for 25 years, including 15 years of full-time residential practice and study at Great Vow Zen Monastery. 4 years of that time was spent in intensive silent meditation retreat. To complement his Zen practice, he is also trained in voice dialogue, process work, Dzogchen, and the ParaTheatre medium of Antero Alli. You can find out more about his work at solusluna.org.
Welcome to Letting Grow, the podcast about one of the spiritual journey's most difficult and courageous moments, letting go of who we think we should be so we can grow into who we most deeply are. I'm your host, Claire Villarreal, and I appreciate your joining me today. So thank you so much for joining me and being willing to share your story with all of us, Jogen. And so as I was getting ready to hear your story about your death as a monk and your rebirth into your new phase of life and how that's going, I was really curious, what was it like to take that initial step of leaving behind sort of the typical American, college to career sort of path and becoming a monk? So would you give us the prequel before you give us the sort of current death and rebirth process?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it began when I was 17. So I graduated high school. And at this point, I hadn't done any meditation, no interest whatsoever in spirituality. I mean, literally zero. Like zero. My family is basically atheistic, or they're theistic, furious at God for the suffering that has been thrust upon them. So,
and they're Jewish, right?
Yeah,
so that's kind of fair.
Non-practicing, yeah, right. It is fair, right? Yes.
Yeah.
People of the diaspora, something, yeah. So I went to Japan when I was 17. I was dating a Japanese woman, my high school sweetheart. And there's always this mysterious affinity with Japanese women. Some white guys have this like Asian girl thing, but it wasn't just an Asian girl thing for me. It was Japanese girls, which is like a in retrospect. But
very specific and maybe karmic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I went to Japan with a friend of mine, and we had these tours scheduled of Kyoto and Nara, the ancient cities with all these beautiful temples. And I really wasn't interested in them. I just wanted to go to the amazing giant Japanese arcades and buy robot toys and these sorts of things.
That's fair.
So, yeah, youth wasted on the young. But I did go into a number of temples, and I think something struck me. And also something about the Japanese people. It was amazing what I most remember is you would go to someone's home and they would give you a gift. And the hospitality was like so robust. I was just really struck by that. Everybody I met.
Wow.
So while I was away, my grandfather died. And unexpectedly, totally unexpected heart attack.
Oh, geez.
And he was a meditator and an Aikido practitioner. And we had never connected over this because I was very much, who I was when I was 17. I hadn't turned towards contemplative thinking at all. So he died, and in helping my grandmother clear out his study and taking care of her after his passing, I inherited his library, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, and there were 3 things that were key. One was a book on Zen, a book on yoga, and then this meditation device, which was like goggles and sound that used entrainment to put you in various samadhis and relaxation states, and you would just choose what level. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
They really
did it work?
Yeah. So the moral of the story is I discovered, wow, it's possible to really calm down. So first of all, it was just like my nervous system mellowed out more than it ever had before. I didn't realize how anxious I was until I started doing these practices. Mm-hmm. And my mind started to calm. And then I got interested more in actual meditation, and there was also a psychedelic thread that went. I was experimenting with that at this time, and so I would have openings. The kind of glimpses that psychedelics can give of other forms of consciousness, other realms of consciousness. So I just became more and more curious, and I began, I think as many people do, ferociously devouring every Dharma book they had at Borders Books. You know, and this is like 1997 or 8. There wasn't that much, actually. There was, but there wasn't. So I just started doing more and more practice and finding more and more both experiences that really struck me and shook up my sense of reality and who I was, and also just therapeutic. Like my body was getting healthier, and I was less anxious. And it's interesting because it intersected with, as soon as I began to come into my body, I began to have to reckon with trauma and process grief.
Wow. Yeah.
My father died when I was 7. He died from cancer, and that really devastated my mother. You know, she was a young widow, and so my sister and I, in a way, there's a way in which we were orphaned because she was she was just devastated and didn't have a lot of resource. And none of that trauma and none of that suffering had really been processed. I didn't do any therapy. They tried to get me in, but I just didn't want to do that as a young boy. So, yeah, basically that all came to a head and began to surface as I started to practice. And I think it created this like mystical curiosity about what I was experiencing, and also this almost necessity to address what was an emergent existential and spiritual crisis, but it was coming through my body. So I just took deeper and deeper refuge in the practice. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. There were numerous groups, Buddhist groups. It's funny, I would sit with this Vipassana group, and I was always like, this needs to be a little bit more strict. I heard that in Zen they hit you with a stick. I think I need the stick.
Oh man, you must have been Japanese in a previous life. Who else thinks that?
I mean, the book I inherited from my grandfather was by Wilhelm. No, is that the last name? It's about it's an autobiography of a Dutchman who goes to a Rinzai Zen monastery. It's classic book. I'm sorry, the title is eluding me. The Empty Mirror.
Ooh.
And it's a powerful book, especially I was totally Buddhist naive. It was powerful, and it explained his like openings, and the rigor of the monastery actually did appeal to me. There's something about being stripped of my comforts and put right up against, in an inescapable intimacy from my heart, and like face spirit squarely, I think. It's bizarre that called to me, because I had, very much a hedonistic life, and and I remember around that time reading the Dhammapada, and the Buddha basically articulating the nature of desire, and just being furious, like, I don't want to read this. You can keep your enlightenment, leave my desires alone. I found the Dharma offensive.
I love it. I mean, it kind of actually sounds like a good sign, because so many people read it and find it inoffensive, and it doesn't change their life.
Oh, yeah. I think Trungpa said something about that. He said that the true teaching should offend your ego.
Yeah,
And,
that
and
sounds very
that it
Trungpa.
did. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it accelerated, and I tend to be a passionate person. So when I'm into something, I get really into it. And I was doing retreats on my own in my house and reading a lot. And an interesting thing is, besides Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which was, a great book, and I still think it's a great book when I read it, I was reading Tibetan Buddhist books.
Oh, interesting.
And like books by like Tenzin Wangyal and Tarton
Oh,
Tulku.
yeah.
And so I was getting like this Soto Zen thing, but also like this, basically these Nyingma teachers and their view of mind and Buddha nature and reality and what matters and all the values and all of that. So from the beginning, Zen and the Nyingma lineage were really like, at that point, I don't think I knew the difference.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
This is like a parenthetical side note, but one of my teachers was a great, great master in the Nyingma lineage of this last generation. He passed away a few years ago now. And he taught for a long time in Japan. And he actually said that he kind of equated, I don't remember the exact quote, but he kind of equated Zen with Dzogchen. He was like, well, the paths to get there are different, but these two are very similar. So
Yeah.
I just want to, like, from the Nyingma side, say, like, people have said the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. I'd
Yeah,
love
exactly.
to talk about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't
Yeah.
mean to derail the
No,
narrative there.
cool.
I just
Yeah.
want to throw that in.
Yeah, yeah. So it accelerated. I got more and more into the Dharma. My emotional crises and my trauma, like, was coming more and more to a head. My mom was going through a divorce. I lost a girlfriend, just through my own confusion. I was full on as a DJ and was trying to like move into music, and I just had like this massive inner critic attack and deleted all my songs, and it was just all this like psychic material was just rising up and overwhelming me. So I was 22, I think. I went to Zen Mountain Monastery in the Catskills and just kind of threw myself into this environment, and yeah, the rest is history.
Wow.
That's
It
not
just
where I
sounds like
trained, but that was where I first did intensive Zen practice.
Like you said, it sounds like a very passionate engagement with the Dharma and just so much stuff going on, which is kind of age appropriate for, 20, 22, all the stuff coming up as you become an adult.
Yeah.
So you go to, what was the name of it in the Catskills?
Zen Mountain Monastery.
Zen Mountain Monastery. I love it. So how did you get from there to deciding to ordain?
Well, I spent a month there, and it's amazing how much can be condensed into a month. How like deeply saturated time can be with experience and impact. So spent a month, including a long retreat, which in the Zen style, and especially there at that time, is very rigorous. So I was just, someone told me when I came back I was floating. I had really lightened from the experience, but at the same time I was afraid it was too rigorous for me to continue there, particularly because of health. I was having health challenges, and it just was there wasn't a lot of motherly energy there. It was kind of had like a masculine vibe at that time. Well, while I was there, I met somebody who had studied with my current teachers, who was from Oregon, who lived at Zen Mountain Monastery intermittently. And she's a very nice person, and I started a conversation with her and said, I was thinking of moving to Portland. And at that time, like, nobody really heard of Portland, at least not where I was from. And she's like, oh, Portland's great, and if you go, you should study with Jan Chosen Bays and Hogan Bays. And so I moved to Portland a few months later. I didn't know anybody. I just had this kind of intuition that, oh yeah, that would be a good thing to do. And I
Did
heard
you
the
know
music
about
scene
Great
was great.
Vow?
No.
Wow.
I
Okay.
didn't know about Great Vow. And I didn't think I was going to go into a monastery. I thought, okay, I'm going to go to this cool city and be able to practice Dharma and do other things.
Wow.
And within, like, I don't know, just a few months of being there, I went from just going to our city sitting program and ended up selling my car, quitting my job, and moving to the monastery.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, I got swept up, or maybe I could say I was blessed with an archetypal resonance with my teacher. It was the thing where you meet your teacher, and he was the Senex, and I was the Puer, and it was like he was the old wise man, and I was like the fiery, confused young person. But I really trusted him and felt an affinity right away. You know, in Zen, you have these one-on-one meetings with the teacher, private meetings, and I felt an intimacy and a trust there. And it just seemed like the thing to do, and so I moved to Great Vow, and that was in 2003.
2003.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. What did it feel like to take that step? Like, were you thinking, this is my lifetime path, I'm going to do this for a while? Yeah, what was it like at that time?
Well, at that time, I was 23, and I thought, all right, I'm going to do this for 2 years, and then I'm going to come out and be enlightened, and then when I try to date women, I'm going to be a lot more, like, cool.
Yeah.
That was my basic plan.
I had a similar plan when I graduated from college.
Is
I
that
was also
right?
probably about 23. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 years, enlightenment, and bam, you're going to succeed with the ladies after that.
That's
Is
right.
that what happened?
That was basically, it's not quite what happened. No, it didn't quite play out like that. Yeah. So, no, but I didn't know. I wasn't thinking about ordination or anything at that point. But I just got more and more inspired by what my teachers were doing, and the young other ordained, a number of people that only ordained within 3 or 4 years. They had been monks, and it was the place was being founded. It only started at the end of 2001 or early 2002. So I came in, and there's all this energy about building this new, both improving the physical setting and also just this new, a different manifestation of Zen monasticism than had existed in America at that point. Everywhere else was kind of either really Japanese and formal, or really strict and intense and kind of macho. And the abbess is a woman, you know, one of my teachers, and so there's definitely more of a feminine, it's more balanced. So I was excited about that, and I also knew at that time if I went back to Portland or wherever, I was really just going to work at a record store. Like, that's, you know, I was just an obsessive record collector, music nerd, drummer. Like, there was no career aspiration in me, but there was spiritual aspiration. So I just had the hunch that if I stay here, I'm going to make more of my life.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that sounds very wise, actually.
I don't know. Yeah. No. You know, there's pros and cons. There's trade-offs to spending your 20s and 30s in a monastic environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, you know, I didn't exactly spend mine in a monastic environment, but something pretty similar, you know, working and studying the Dharma, going to Asia, coming back, you know, it's a prime time to make money.
That's
I mean,
right.
a lot of people that I know who end up, you know, retiring early or whatever, getting to practice the Dharma full time, they made a lot of money in that time. And, you know, just practically speaking, it's amazing to be able to dedicate that time and that energy to the Dharma, but it does sound like something that would have a big trade-off.
It does. And I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I had still had I had a bad, like, intestinal disorder at that time. And since my father died of cancer, I always thought I was going to die of cancer when I hit 35, which is when he died.
Oh, geez.
Which I've heard is a thing that happens with children, that you get the sense of your end is coming around the time that they pass, your parents. So I had this urgency, and I didn't think I was going to live. I didn't feel, it was more a feeling level. I didn't feel I was going to have a long life. And so I just wanted to throw myself into this thing that seemed maybe a lot more relevant than my worldly and social success.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was very idealistic. I was very idealistic. I don't, the picture of a wise 20-something is not quite right. No. Terribly idealistic.
All right. I retract my earlier assessment. I feel like I just want to say I think I also was like very drawn into the Dharma, and I think there was a very karmic element to my, attraction to it. And I think it's hard sometimes to be the person who doesn't choose to do like what everyone else your age is doing, and, to have that career trajectory. But I mean, again, from a karmic perspective, how could you spend your time better? Yeah. It's sort of like prime years for engaging and shaping your personality and what you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So you're there, you're at the monastery, you end up deciding to ordain. What was that? Can you give us a snapshot of what life was like, for you as a monk? And then, I guess that's a good place to start. Just what was daily life like? What was retreat like? What was your experience as a monk?
Well, the practice schedule is very rigorous. So you're up at before 4 and meditating from 4:30 to 6:30, and then you would do chanting, and then you'd have this formal breakfast, and then a short break, and then work, and then lunch, and a short break, and back, and then evening meditation. It was very regimented until you had the day and a half off. So there was a rigor to it, and I loved that. We did retreat every month, at least 6 days, sometimes more like 2 weeks, especially if we had another guest retreat on top of the Zen retreat. So I was doing a lot of practice, and I got swept up into, do you know the term archetypal possession?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but would you explain it?
Yeah, well, as far as I understand, I'm an amateur Jungian. The archetypal possession is when an archetype overtakes you so much that you're no longer aware that it's operating through your consciousness. It's really just living through you, and you have no perspective on it. And that happened to me as I got swept up in an archetypal monk vision of life, and so I just was, I wouldn't let a minute go away if I wasn't meditating or studying. It was just super hardcore. I guess I was channeling my testosterone. I don't know what I was doing. But so those days were just all about sitting meditation and reading the Dharma and working with my teacher. That was it. Especially the early years. There was a big struggle around sexuality. A lot of sexual energy. I had definitely, I had girlfriends before, so I kind of knew what it was like to have romantic love in my life, and then that got cut off. But it's not a celibate monastery. So the abbots are a married couple, and they're the other ordained. Most of them were in couples. So that was a really hard thing about it. And I think I identified as a celibate by choice, and for a number of years I just kind of became both rigid, trying to separate myself from the other people and be the true monk, and at the same time that helped me really focus my energies. So I just had a chunk of time where I was very, very serious, and I think I did a lot of good work in that period of time. Although every idealistic passion has its, backfire. The brighter the sun, the larger the shadow. So there was something relationally I suffered. And I think in some ways my relational development got a little bit stunted because I was so focused on solitude and impersonal energies. Yeah, and I don't want to paint the vibe of the place as somber. It's actually really fun because Chozen Roshi, the abbess and one of my teachers, she's a very playful person. So we have a marimba band, and there was a lot of playfulness. It was like it's admirable, the ability to go from totally playful and silly and then like really serious and practicing with real focus. So
That is kind of a dichotomy you see a lot in like lives of great masters and things like that, that the two, it almost seems like they feed each other. When you are being kind of light and playful, it's that much harder to take the world so seriously and just reify everything.
Yeah. Wow. I definitely
It sounds
took
like an
myself very
amazing
seriously as a
opportunity.
Zen person. What?
Sorry, I was just saying it sounds like an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. It was great. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and it evolved over the years. The place grew, and we had more and more, actually, Tibetan Buddhist influence as far as retreats over the years, beginning with Alan Wallace, and he would teach, and then Lama Michael Conklin would teach like 7-point mind training, and then Dan Brown, who's a Mahamudra teacher, would come with his lamas and teach either Mahamudra or Dzogchen in the Bund tradition, actually.
Ooh.
And then Keith Dowman. So there's an ecumenical flavor at Great Vow, which I really appreciated. I think it helped me stick around because it wasn't just like Zen. It was a broader view of the Dharma. And then my life started. I had a partner of 7 years, something like that. She was also ordained. So that was a part of my life, doing that together. I became a teacher, gradually, like a lot of sanghas. I was teaching at Reed College, meditation classes in Portland for a long time, which was really enriching, and gradually grew into more and more teaching and leadership, and that's a whole thing, a whole practice in itself, and a whole new set of challenges, and yeah.
And so how was it as you were kind of spending your time growing into this leadership role, but you're also like doing some teachings in Portland? What did that look like? Were you spending time already down in the city? How much of your time was spent where? Like, how did that work?
Yeah. The monastery, of course, pre-COVID, has a rhythm of the ordained coming down to our city temple and teaching once a week or so and going back. And so at first I was teaching at Reed on Sunday nights, which is our day off. And then I eventually began teaching 2 classes a week. So I was going to Portland a lot, spending a good amount of time in Portland. And we would spend our days off here sometimes in the city and connect with friends and just let our absence of hair down. But I think that's actually an important part of my story here, because it was always kind of integrated. It was never, we were never really set apart, but we would have this rhythm of just integration with the wider community, whether that be the wider Zen community or the Portland community, and then back in. So I was always going back and forth, which I appreciate now as helping me do the practice of integration, whatever that means.
Yeah, it seems like from very early accounts of Buddhism, the Sangha was kind of set up that way. They'd have to go and do their alms round every single day so that they could never get too far from the community that they were supposed to be kind of part of.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear that working out for y'all, even in a very different context.
Yeah. The monastery is in a rural town, which is really not interested, fairly conservative, really not interested in Zen Buddhism. So coming to Portland was the way to get like an expanded sense of people and community. Yeah.
The integration. Yeah. Wow. So I'm sort of thinking now about your big transition that it sounds like you're kind of still going through, of deciding to leave the monastery and to go, to the other side of what you were integrating to more of the city life. So how did you, I'm super curious to hear more about that, but I'm just kind of wondering, how did you get to the point where you decided you needed to leave that life? Hi friends, want to join the Letting Grow tribe? I'll be starting a bi-weekly newsletter in early 2021 with links to articles, YouTube videos, other podcasts, and basically the best of the rebirth content I've come across lately. Some examples of the kinds of things I want to share with you include a snap judgment story about a bull who seemed to be the reincarnation of another bull, a viral article about the creepy things kids say, but some of them 100% seem to refer to previous lives, and some excerpts from the book I'm writing now about the lessons Tibetan Buddhist teachings on life and death offer to those of us going through transitions. Spoiler alert, that's all of us. Best of all, if you're subscribed, you'll get links to join free live video calls with me and other subscribers every couple of months. So pause this episode now, find the newsletter sign-up link in the show notes, and join your tribe.
Well, I think the honest answer is I don't know. But I have some guesses.
That's fair.
I have some guesses about how that unfolded. I don't think it was a choice that I made. I don't think it was a choice. I think it was various factors converging and putting kind of pressure upon me to leave. And
Yeah.
there was midlife crisis, you know, where the unlived life rears its head, you know, whatever you haven't embodied of, like, you know, your archetypal spectrum of who you are, kind of calls, and mortality takes on a different flavor. Like, okay, I'm halfway done. So that was in the mix, and that felt transpersonal. It felt like, and actually my astrology chart kind of confirmed that there was just different forces acting on me around independence and having a less role-centered life. There's a lot of pressure being an ordained person in a community, or at least in mine. And the pressure is not conscious, but it's just in the system of you're basically seen as a role. And you're trying to embody this role, and you're trying to embody it authentically. But inevitably, being in the role so much means that part of you is marginalized. And so I felt that acting on me. I had done a sabbatical and got involved with a practice called process work, which is a kind of in the lineage of Jungian psychology. And it broadened my sense of spirituality. I don't quite have words for it, but there were things that were off the radar of Buddhism that were taught in process work that made me think about how I was teaching and how I was helping students. And I started to think, after I learned these various skills and views, I thought, I want to integrate this into what I'm doing. But it means a different way of working, because it's not quite, I can't just bring this other form of approaching consciousness into our Zen tradition, and it can like disrupt things with the other teachers and the system we have. So then I started to think I might want to work in a different way than the traditional Zen teacher, or at least how we embody the traditional Zen teacher. It also, one of the things you do in process work is, and this has heritage in Jungian psychology, is that bodily symptoms, chronic symptoms, are often the unconscious trying to come through. You know, whatever you don't make conscious shows up as fate, and the first place that shows up as fate is your body. And so I was unfolding some chronic symptoms. I had had this itchiness for a long time, like extreme itchiness, and I just thought it was like a prana sickness or too much meditation or not enough vitamin B. I never could figure out what it was. And I was intensely itchy, and then in the process working with their facilitators, unfolding the symptom means you kind of explore its energy and what that energy wants for you. You like assume there's like a telos for the energy. It's like it's going somewhere. It has a purpose. And it was really clear that I needed to break out of current limitations. It was just saying that very clearly. And as soon as I opened it up as a possibility, I began to realize, no, it's ready for me to expand. It's time for me to expand my realm of functioning.
Wow.
Yeah. So those are some of the threads in it. Yeah.
I'm just curious, you're ready to expand. On the one hand, just hearing that, and, I think I went through a very similar process. Just hearing it sounds exciting, but it also sounds kind of scary. What was it like to have that moment of, starting to wake up to these symptoms, maybe being a little more than just physical?
It was a couple years process, really owning it and starting to talk to my teachers about it. And one of the things, there was an emotional and like familial pressure because I was thought to be the next abbot and to be a key part of the succession plan for the monastery and for the organization. So this decision, I think, was kind of tamped down for a long time from a sense of duty and from a fear of letting down, the family. Because any community takes on family system dynamics, right? And so I was, the dutiful son was acting on me, and I didn't want to let my teachers down or the community. So I struggled with that for a long time and had to do a lot of process with different people and modalities to help sort it out. And I had to sort out, especially not wanting to disappoint my parents, my teachers, that dynamic.
Yeah.
So I forgot your question by now. I got carried away.
I think the basic one was just, how did you come to the point of realizing that you needed to go through this death process?
Yes.
Although maybe it didn't seem like a death process in the beginning. I don't know.
I started having suicidal fantasies.
Whoa, I guess that'll do it.
I started having spontaneous suicidal fantasies that I didn't understand. And I was feeling really low. I was really contemplating leaving the known, which was very frightening because I had not cultivated any financial resources for all those years, for 15 years. I didn't have a college degree. I basically dropped out of college to go to Zen grad school. And so there was this fear of I can't go out in the world because I'm just gonna end up, under a bridge somewhere. I don't know what to do. There was this irrational fear of I was going to abandon myself by doing this.
Yeah.
So I was facing that, and I was facing the letting people down and concerns that the community might be harmed by me leaving. And on the other hand, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of excitement about possibilities and bringing more of my other selves into the mix and integration in a real way. But I had this fantasy, these suicidal fantasies would come up, and the fantasy was basically, I don't want to hurt anybody by killing myself. I don't even want them to know that I did suicide. So I rent a car and I go on a road trip and I drive off a beach cliff. I make it look like an accident and I plunge into the waters. And I brought that to my process worker, and we were unfolding the dream, and she was like, "Oh, of course, you're going off the set path and you're plunging into the unknown." And we started going into the image, and then I realized the image was not about physical death. I was taking it, it's so easy to take these things literally. No, it was an image of a kind of spiritual death.
Yeah.
And that I had to do because it kept on arising. So that was a tough time. A lot could be said about that time, but I made the decision. I made the shift.
Yeah.
And at first I was part-time in Portland and part-time at the monastery. And really like both worlds. Like, you know, I would like be down here and I had my responsibilities at the temple and I was teaching, but I'd also be like going on dates and like, you know, drinking beers at a jazz club. And the next morning I get in the car and go back up to the monastery. And it was this real interesting, like, two worlds life for a while.
Yeah.
And then COVID came, and I was at the monastery, and I had just started dating somebody who I felt a real deep connection with at that time. And I just thought, no, I got to get on with my life. I got to make a further leap. So now I'm full-time in Portland and starting my business, thinking about how I'm going to support myself, while also finding the balance of how much to teach in the Zen community and how to be present there, and which is important to me still.
I'm just there's so much in this. I feel like could have another couple more conversations and not exhaust it. I'm just wondering though, you know, hearing you describe especially this fantasy or this image of the car driving off the mountainside into the water. What do you think died when you left the old life behind? I mean, in a way, you lived out that fantasy. You went off the path.
Yeah.
So.
What a beautiful question. Well, monkishness died. Like that whole way of being and that way of engaging the Dharma died. Which was letting go of a certain division between the sacred and the everyday further than I thought I could or I had. You know, that's like a Zen thing. Like there isn't that, and we celebrate that. But in my mind, there really was like the deepest practice is to be sitting in meditation and retreat, and everything else is just details between. And there's a lot to that monk ideal that I think died for me. And maybe there was some pride in that, or also some kind of certainty that I was doing it right. That's one of the things that often, I think, for a lot of monastics, one of the things that creeps in is we're doing it right. This is what the Buddha said we should do, and everyone else is a lesser version of what we are. I'm afraid a lot of monastics feel that way to some degree, and the tradition can kind of reinforce that in who they celebrate. And as soon as I started to die, I became much happier, and like. As soon as I started
as soon as I started to die, I became much happier. I'm not sure I've ever heard someone say that before, but that's
dying
profound.
Is fantastic. Dying to ideals is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to reflect back. You know, it sounds like earlier, I remember you saying you kind of got possessed by that archetype of the monk. It sounds like a big thing to lose. Even if there was a lot of freedom that came with that, I just want to take a moment and say that out loud. Yeah.
It happened gradually, specifically when I started working with Keith Dowman, who's a real yogi. He's a real yogi, but he's not a monk. You know, like I'd go out to dinner with him, and he'd just be like eating a steak and drinking beers, and like, you know, like I'd have to. You know, be careful who I brought him around because he might say something offensive. He was just like totally like an unaffected, free. I think there's a way in which in monastic communities there's a normative affect or like personality is parametered about how what are you allowed to embody, and like sometimes there can be a performance of kindness and Buddhistness, and he was so. Free in who he was, and didn't have these kind of dualities of now I'm spiritual and that's worldly. I don't know. There's something about him that was very free, and he was a layperson, and I really was so inspired by his teaching. And he actually, you know, he said. He's kind of anti-monastic, and he kind of said like monasteries are spiritual kindergarten.
Oh, snap. Oh, my God.
Yeah. Yeah, which is wrong.
There's definitely a thread of that kind of thought in like the Nyingma or Dzogchen tradition, but yeah, it's not the whole thing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's wrong, but there's a thread of truth, and so I just started thinking about the ways it limited a full expression of this too is the Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
This too is the Buddha nature. This arising. So there were other things. I always felt like I could never be a monk.
Interesting.
I felt like I could never.
Like you were a monk, but you felt like you couldn't be one.
I was always falling short. Like I couldn't be pure enough. Like I never believed some of the things like possessions are not worth having, and like there's a certain aesthetic or like there's certain values that I wanted to believe and embody, but just never quite stuck to me. And so there was sometimes an imposter syndrome. Like Dharma and Zen, and yes, totally, I'm with that, and I do my best to be a teacher, and I feel like I can show up in that role, but I never quite fit as a monk. I wasn't celibate, for example, and our tradition is not celibate, but that's kind of an outsider's thing. Most monastics are celibate, and so it was. I did it, and I think as a skillful means, it served me in a lot of ways, but changing form and not being that was really a release for me.
Changing form and not being that was really a release for me. Man.
Yeah.
I feel like that just kind of nails so much of what's powerful and difficult about the process of transition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So you went through the process of dying in a certain way to that old archetype or that old like definition of who you are. What's it been like after that? How did you find your feet in your new role? What is your new role?
Well, my new role, well, I still teach, and I teach in the Zen community, and I do like one-on-one work with people now, and there's a way in which it wasn't that hard to find my feet. You froze for a second. There was a way in which it wasn't that hard to find my feet as far as being comfortable, except making a livelihood was something I had a lot of anxiety about. How am I going to do that? And I have this fear that I'm going to end up doing something for my livelihood that doesn't really share what I've learned. It doesn't really embody all I've developed, and that I'm going to waste those years. So that because that fear is in there, there has been some real anxiety about that. Like, how do I make a livelihood now? Yeah, so that's been a theme for sure about how do I do that, and I'm working that out, and so far so good. The role now it feels like I kind of put on my Zen robe, metaphorically speaking, and there I am, and I'm like in that mind state, and then I take it off, and I'm not in that mind state anymore. I'm still practicing, but there's a way in which I'm like flowing between roles more than I used to, I feel. Which it feels really freeing. I value that as an aspect of freedom, not just no self as far as like the unfindability of any core to the mind and that openness, but I feel like no self is embodied in a fluid moving in and out of different roles and ways of being in life. And that's opened up more for me now because I'm not a monk. I'm still ordained as a priest, but I'm not living as a monk. So there's more opportunities for that.
Yeah. I'm kind of struck by in your description of leaving and then what you're doing now, I'm struck by how much easier it is to define yourself as, I am a monk and I teach here. Or for me, I used to work at my Dharma center, so I am the programs director at this place. And then once you leave that, it's kind of hard to actually define it, like in some short, easy phrase, what you do or who you are. Yeah. Who do you feel like you are now? I mean, what is there a new sort of role that you would say you play now, or do you define yourself differently?
I don't know. Do I define myself? I'm not sure I do that. Do you define yourself?
I feel like sometimes I need a phrase, and I've been working on what that phrase is. I feel like for me, to leave behind that really role-based identity was kind of like taking off a suit and feeling light, or like unzipping like a monkey costume or something. And I mean, not to denigrate my role, but like, to take off this big suit that had been covering the whole of me and to discover like, oh, that was sort of who I was, but maybe I don't need to put on another, monkey costume or dress up like a giant hot dog or whatever I was doing.
Wow. The things you do in the Tibetan tradition.
Hot dog sadhana, I mean, it's pretty profound when you think about it.
Got to get that transmission.
Yeah, it's pretty secret. Shouldn't have probably said it.
I love this question, but it kind of stumps me.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I ask it because I'm not sure how to answer it either.
I mean, I think like, oh, I'm a kitty daddy, and then I'm a Zen teacher, and then I'm a record collector, and then I'm a boyfriend, and then I'm like, a guy walking down the street, and then I'm a friend. I think the roles are like multifarious, and I'm just moving between them continually. Mm-hmm. But as far as like a professional identity, I still identify as a Dharma teacher. Mm-hmm. Or at least other people identify me as that, and so I go, oh yeah. I can find that sometimes.
Like if you need something to put on a business card, it says Dharma teacher.
Yeah, among other things, facilitator, other titles, trying to figure out. I think one of the things you're raising is a really interesting question in the West. It's that what's the archetype of the lay teacher? Mm-hmm. Because the monk and the yogi, okay, but what's our archetype? Mm-hmm. And is there such a thing as an emergent archetype? We're such as post-traditionalists, meaning just like Americans, North Americans, we don't have role-based society. It's like post-role in a lot of ways, and so that's new for the Dharma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of feel like. I feel like if there was a job, Dharma teacher, like that's the job I want to do. I feel like it's there's role-based identities, and I feel like in my life I've more had job-based identities, that what you do or, profession or whatever, it's been an easy way to identify myself. And now it's no longer an easy way to identify myself. Like this is something new.
Yeah. My passion is not having an identity. That's like my passion, disrupting identity. That's always coming out of my mouth when I'm teaching, and I hope I practice it, but that's really like ecstasis, getting outside of oneself. That's one of the most meaningful experiences and like guiding lights for me, is different ways of doing that. So yeah, I'm interested as much in finding some kind of identity as I am in disrupting it and being free of it.
It's such an interesting play. I mean, I think when I was younger, my sense of like, what does no self mean? It was simpler. It was like, oh, everything I think I am, that's not true. And I like the way you kind of expressed earlier that maybe it's actually the ability to shift between all these different things. And at the end of the day, all the different labels they're all sort of situational. You know, kitty daddy or boyfriend or whatever. Like, you know, I think we all have these roles that we play, and there's not one of them that like defines who we are.
Right.
And I don't think any society has really ever been able to function with that kind of like fluidity or flexibility in people's identities. Like we all want to nail ourselves down in one way or another.
So you think we're doomed?
No.
Or are we evolving?
I think we're fighting. Yeah, I think we're fighting the same fight in a different way.
I love that.
That would be my take. Like I think, you know, we're only a few generations into this encounter between Buddhism and the West, and I think we're up against a new set of very powerful forces that want to define us in certain ways. And now it's not religion or what caste you're born into, which is sort of what the traditional tools of Buddhism were developed to pry open. So I kind of feel like it's a moment of developing new tools, and it's exciting, but also kind of lonely sometimes.
Yeah. I love that the Dharma was developed to pry open those forms of the caste system and the strict roles. I think psychic complexity is the maturing of the human spirit.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
really understanding that there's not just another way to see like no self is there's not just one at the center. James Hillman says invites us into a polycentric understanding of being a human being, and all the marginalization and rigidity and like frankly like shallowness that comes when we think we're just one thing, and we think there's just one motivating, animating force in us. So I think that too is an important thing for me, is complexity is like a more mature embracing of what we are. It's not a negative thing. You know, we're embracing more of what we are, and that's a challenge to that. But I think we're like the universe is increasing in richness as we do it.
Yeah. It just makes me think about, you know, deity yoga practice in the Tibetan tradition, and the way that every time you do a practice, you're sort of trying on a different identity. And to me, it's a similar way of kind of breaking down that sense of, you know, oh, I'm going to do this practice and I'm going to end up looking one way. Like, no, if you do this practice and you follow it all the way through, you're going to end up being able to express all these different types of energies within the one, you know, physical embodiment. Like, there's just something in you that has to crack open to be able to even appreciate that or want to have that as your like spiritual goal. And it reminds me of what you're saying, you know, that there's no longer like, I don't know, one easy self-definition to go to.
Yeah. And our traditional systems have this. I have to like check myself, because it's not like this is new. Like you're saying with the deity yoga, and in the Zen tradition, the koans have this function of stepping outside of yourself and becoming the tea lady, becoming the mountain, you know, becoming empty space, becoming a rock, whatever. Like there's this invitation to step outside yourself. So that isn't new. No. But the ability to actually live it out in society may be broader now.
Yeah.
I practice called ParaTheatre.
I think the form of our society is new.
Right.
Sorry.
For sure. There was this practice called ParaTheatre I was involved with for a couple of years that was all about being animated by different archetypes and stepping into them fully, and doing like the alchemy of moving between them and finding a place that is neither side. And yeah, that really has influenced my teaching and my way of thinking of the Dharma. And I think after tasting that, it's hard to like lose the hunger for it sticks. The ability to get outside of oneself, and that there's a way to do that. It just doesn't have to just be some event of grace or an accident. There are practices that can take us outside of, into the fluidity of self that, I thrive on that. Love that.
Wow. I feel like this has been such a journey, to discuss like what brought you into Zen and into monasticism, what brought you out of it. And, I get the sense that this rebirth is something very different from the types of identity that came before, something more mature, something that you have in midlife as opposed to in your 20s.
I hope so. Yeah. I'd like to think there's a little bit more maturity in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that can be said for a role is a role, especially in like a Dharma community, can hold you to a high standard of functioning, or like demands the best of yourself. So that's like the positive side of the role of a monastic, or being centered in a Dharma community is the shared standards of behavior and how we show up as compassionately and with as much dignity and all of those things as we can. And so that I don't have as much. And that's, I think that's the now I'm finally getting around to the bigger challenge. I think those structures can really bring out the best in us, and without them, I have to either create those structures or just find the impetus in myself. And it's not always easy.
Yeah. Ethics and accountability outside of like a sort of traditional, Dharma society framework. It is more difficult to find that.
Yeah. Even like just the spirit of service. My life in the monastery was like I was always on for being of service in some way. You can't fall back into self-centeredness for long. Because, and so now looking out for that is up to me. And my
Have
girlfriend
you found?
helps.
That's good. I was just going to ask, have you found accountability partners, or, some way of getting that structure or that like accountability that you used to have?
There's part of me that's afraid of, like, has some idea that I could backslide. And that keeps me doing my work. And related to that is with students and with clients, I want to show up with as much resource and depth and integrity as I can. So how I live my life between sessions and teachings makes all the difference. So that really helps. I think students and clients, like, the offering of myself is what motivates me to keep practicing. And like making a beneficial offering of myself, being able to hold space with like depth and sensitivity. That's the motivator. That's the shape now. That's the discipline.
Yeah, it sounds like its own challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And is there anything else that you want to add, or that we should know, hearing this story of transformation?
Well, if you want to experience some of that transformation yourself, I've recently translated a practice that I did pre-COVID in person, of course, into the Zoom format. It's called Universe Somatic. And it's, in a way, bringing Zen and Dzogchen and these archetypal practices and energy work all together. And it alternates between sitting and movement practice, short periods. And the movement practices, to intensify presence and express different energies, and then those come back into the sitting practice. So I think it'd be really fun for people if such things sound interesting, and invite you to join me for that. especially if the getting outside of yourself piece really captured your imagination.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I'll put some links to, ways for people to find that and to connect with you in the show notes. What else are you doing that people might be able to join you for?
Join me. I regularly teach retreats through Zen Community of Oregon. So you could go to zendust.org and find online retreats that I'm teaching. I do one-on-one spiritual coaching, meditation guidance. I do voice dialogue parts work. So if folks are interested in opening up the multidimensionality of themselves, it's something I do with people and really enjoy doing. I also am a soundscape DJ. So I have an ambient DJ, and you could find my sound meditation mixes on Mixcloud. Look up Beyond the Sound, and you could find that. Yeah, that's basically it.
I've actually checked some of that out, and it's really cool. I highly recommend it.
Oh, cool. Oh, thanks. It's nice to hear.
Yeah. And your company or your business is called Solus Luna, right?
Solus Luna, yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, so
can we find you on social media?
I have a Facebook page, Solus Luna Integrated, Solus Luna Integrated Awareness. So I'm on Facebook, and I'm not very good about being on Instagram, though I am on there. Solus Luna Awareness on Instagram. But the website is the main hub to connect with the work I'm doing, and if folks want to make contact with me. Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, I appreciate this contact and just getting to kind of vicariously experience your journey. And your offerings sound amazing. Just that integration of all these different sort of spiritual practices. It sounds like an amazing growth time for you and something that we get to sit in on and benefit from. So thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Yeah,
and
thanks for your time.
Thank you. All the best to you in this new phase of whatever this phase shows itself to be.
Thanks for coming along for today's exploration of the process of letting grow. If you found this episode helpful, please share it. And subscribe now so you're always in the loop. For links to more content related to today's episode, please see the show notes. See you again next week.